Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping the African continent. The US and Nigeria are experiencing diplomatic tensions after President Trump threatened possible military action over religious violence. Where is this going? Nigeria has approved a 15% import duty on petrol and diesel to encourage local refinery, which may increase fuel prices. Critics say it mainly benefits the Dangote refinery. Will this policy truly boost local refining or just make fuel more expensive for consumers? Yesterday, SBM Intelligence published its 2025 Health Preparedness Index, and it shows that no Nigerian state is ready for an emergency. What is the problem? How can it be sorted? Joining us today for further insight is Victor Ejechi, analyst at SBM Intelligence. Welcome, Victor, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me as well.
Okay, let's start with our first story. So recently, President Donald Trump designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern over religious violence and hinted at the possibility of military action if the situation does not improve. In response, we saw a statement from the Nigerian Minister of Foreign Affairs who emphasized sovereignty and the need for diplomatic engagement. Now, given this designation and the diplomatic exchange that followed, how do you see the tension evolving? What would you say is also missing from Nigerians' response so far? And how might our government have more effectively addressed President Donald Trump's claims and warning?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay, good. First of all, the country of particular concern designation for me is not just a diplomatic label. I see it more like a formal statement that the US is making. So they're literally seeing a systemic religious related violence in Nigeria, and for them it is unaddressed by the Nigerian government. Now, but what is worrying is not that the warning came. For me, I think it is more like it is predictable. So for months, we observed that the American legislator and some of the senators and rights groups have flagged this same concern over the months coming, right? So this wasn't a surprise for me. It was a failure of anticipation. But then again, the Nigeria official response are largely limited to, you will see the Nigerian government trying to establish a fact. They feel like, oh, we have a sovereign, we are united, Nigeria is a sovereign state, and I think they're actually missing the point from there, because being a sovereign state doesn't substitute for accountability. Okay, the issue here isn't whether the US can dictate to Nigeria, but whether Nigeria can credibly show that it's protecting all its citizens regardless of faith or region, as the case may be now. A more effective approach would have been a proactive diplomacy, dispatching high-level delegation to Washington, presenting verifiable data on persecution, and also inviting the US to observe some of the community here in Nigeria. So these are things that I think that the Nigerian government can do. But right now, Nigeria is reacting in a more, I would say, in a defensively way instead of trying to lead the conversation. What is leading for me? It's just a strategic communication backed by demonstrable security reforms and all that. So I think that's that for me. Over to you, Vera. Are you there?
Yes, I do agree with you. I mean, our response was kind of defensive. And something you pointed out was we could have predicted it, right? If we had more proactive diplomacy, I think that that's missing. And actually, speaking of accurate data, because data would have informed the conversation going forward for the government to show that, as they said, there's no genocide going on in the country. But I mean, it would have been very, very, more unique and, accountable. I mean, you mentioned accountability as well, that the government showed data to back up their claims. So what are the broader implications of the United States even suggesting the possibility of a military action, both for Nigerian sovereignty and for the security dynamics in the West African region, as we're already seeing as well?
Yeah, so that's actually quite an interesting question. So first of all, the suggestion of the US military intervention is extraordinary and is deeply symbolic. Now, it reflects the US holding confidence in Nigeria's ability to contain the violence internally. Now, even if no strike ever occurs, now the rhetoric alone changes perception. So it actually tells investors and ally that Nigeria's security architecture is actually fluctuating. Now, for sovereignty, this is a red flag because once a state loses the moral authority to protect its people, the door opens to external justification for intervention. Then you start seeing things like humanitarian issues and otherwise now. But for West Africa, for example, any US military involvement would upend the delicate balance within ECOWAS, possibly inviting counter move from other powers like Russia or China, who already have, growing footprint in the Sahel. So the real risk isn't American boots on the ground; it's Nigeria's slow erosion of credibility as a regional stabilizer to prevent that Nigeria must must urgently rebuild both its security legitimacy and among other things. So it's more of a credibility issue. Yeah, even if Donald Trump did not really invade, it's also a credibility issue that is actually affecting the image of Nigeria. Yeah.
I mean, as you spoke, one thing I got from the conversation was the pulse of the people. And I mean, like, we've over the few days we've seen like a lot of swaying. Some people are saying, oh, we need the intervention of the United States, and some people are saying, no, we don't need the intervention, and Nigeria is sovereign as well. So I mean, just it just goes to say as well the pulse of the people, like when you said, when you lose credibility, there's much of people looking for other solutions because they can't find the solutions in our government. Now they are looking for solutions in different places as well. Thank you for that response. So our second story, where we're seeing the Nigerian government approve a 15% import duty on petrol and diesel. The government argues that this policy will encourage investment in local refinery. It would reduce our reliance on imported fuel and strengthen our energy security, which is very, very paramount. However, critics have moved and said, this will just benefit the Dangote refinery. This is also pushing for a monopoly. Given these concerns that I've just highlighted, how realistic is the government's goal of using this import duty to boost local refinery, the capacity of it, and does this policy risk um, concentrating market power in the hands of a single refinery? I mean, the Dangote refinery.
So first of all, the Dangote has done an amazing job in terms of building the refinery. I think we're grateful for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so far so good. One of the functional refinery in the country is the Dangote refinery, and of course, it's also in the private sector. Having said that, and then, so in principle, the government's argument makes a lot of sense. You want to protect domestic investors like Dangote, you want to encourage refining at home, and you also want to stop exporting jobs through fuel import. It makes sense, but in practice here now, the policy is risky because it assumes a level of readiness that doesn't yet exist. So what it means is that the government is assuming that we have a self-sufficient supply of petrol that we need. They are assuming that Dangote can actually produce as much as we need in the country. So Nigeria still import about 60% of its fuel. So imposing a 15% duty now, before even the Dangote, that's the local capacity, is fully stabilized, there is a risk of creating a monopoly where one refinery is. And in this case, we're talking about Dangote here. Now, because of the dominant and almost is the sole supplier of this of petrol in Nigeria as it is right now. But for me, that's not even energy security. That's concentration of risk. Yeah, you're concentrating one power, the supply of crude to one person. Now, the true energy reliance comes from diversity. So we want other people, other players into the market and into the industry. That will help um, more like supply. So this is in practical terms. Now we're saying that if there appear to be, if this import duty take place starts, or for example, it means that whatever import that is going to come into the country in terms of crude oil will be more expensive. And Dangote will now have the monopoly of even be able to supply to Nigerians. Now, the question would not be that does Dangote have the capacity to supply as much as we need as a country? So I think that's the question. It sounds good as you're trying to protect the investor or the investment of Dangote or the local investment, but then again, in practice, it's going to cause a lot of issues as I can see from next year. Yeah.
I mean, I was just going to ask you, you said it will cause some issues, and I'm saying I mean, it's what you said, it will cause some issues. Would like to highlight, like, what can you highlight for us, and what are the likely effects of fuel prices and the cost of living pressure for the ordinary Nigerian, which is most important, and what measures do you think that the Nigerian government can put in place in pushing their policy to ensure that the consumers do not bear the burden that this policy will bring. Because what we have seen is, I mean, with every policy, I mean, at the start is meant for good, but we've seen that in policy implementations, there are always winners and losers. And we don't want like ordinary Nigerians to be the losers in this case, because the government's policies, is geared more of protecting Nigerians. So what do you say um, the Nigerian government can do to reduce this burden on Nigerians?
Yeah, so if you observe since the say subsidy is gone, there have been a lot of policies that is affecting Nigerians, the everyday Nigeria. So we're talking about the diversification, we're talking about the subsidy removal itself, unification of the naira, among other things that have been affected. Now, the immediate risk of this particular policy will be that there will be a rise in fuel prices, right? And I just we might probably experience something close to what we experienced when subsidy was announced gone, And then there's a 15% import duty increase. The 50% actually, the 15% import duty would increase the landing cost of imported petrol by maybe roughly 100 naira per liter. Because if the investor or whoever is supplying into Nigeria, there is an import duty, they have to reflect that cost in the petrol that are important. So that will push the retail price of petrol, maybe go to 1,000 per liter or even higher, depending on the part of Nigeria that you are. The supply chain issues is also something to consider. Now, but consider the fact that, just like you mentioned, household and we're still battling with food inflation, we're still battling with transport costs. So that obviously will be a major blow for the average Nigeria. So we're looking at inflation could rise also maybe by 2 to 3% by estimation, percentage points. That will obviously cascade through everything from food distribution to electricity tariff. No, so these are the issues that might actually result to this policy by the government. So just like you asked that, so to protect consumer, I think the government must pair this policy with a strong regulation. So there have to be a strong regulation in place to deal with some of this policy. Just implementing this policy or trying to announce this policy is not enough. There have to be a form of regulation that will make sure that people do not really suffer. That what regulation actually will mean in this case is that by you will have to enforce transparent pricing. We are looking at publishing the refinery output data, but that is very important. So what are the refinery actually producing, how many is being supplied and all that? The daily data needs to be available, and also maintaining emergency import waiver if local supplier falter. That's important, because if the local supplier did not meet up to the need of Nigerians, the government should have a backup plan to say that, okay, fine, Dangote or whatever cannot meet up what we need. Let's find as much as possible, as fast as possible, an alternative that we can actually use. So most importantly, government needs to treat competition as protection. So if multiple refineries can operate side by side, prices will be stabilized naturally through market discipline, not even a political decree. So otherwise, we risk repeating the old cycle where the single player dictates price and Nigerians pay for inefficiency disguised as a self-sufficiency. So I think these are my take on that.
Interesting take, actually, and I do agree with you. I mean, the government needs to be able to regulate it and, like add certain palliatives that will, cushion the effect of the policy as well. I mean, you mentioned food inflation, the high transportation would go up, price of fuel will go up as well. These are things that we experienced when the fuel subsidy was removed, and Nigerians are just trying to stabilize. So hopefully the government, that I mean, listens and effects the recommendations as well. To our final story, I mean, I'm always interested when SBM releases a new report or an index. And yesterday, SBM released the 2025 Health Preparedness Index. This index was developed to assess how ready every Nigerian state is to detect, respond, and to manage health emergencies. I mean, I'd like us to begin to tell more about what the Health Preparedness Index is in itself, what it's set out to do, measure as well, and why is it important to develop this assessment at this time? What are some of the key findings that stood out for you as from this index?
Yeah, so interestingly, yes, I also love this particular index. So the Health Preparedness Index, which we also refer to as HPI, it's SBM's attempt to answer a simple but critical question, and that's the question of if a major health emergency like or like the COVID pandemic um, uh, outbreak that we had were to eat today, how ready are Nigeria state to respond? That's a very important question for that we thought about after COVID and felt like, okay, we need to start reporting this also. Now, we built this index using multiple indicators. We were looking at the health infrastructure in states. We're looking at, of course, we're also looking at the emergency response funding. We're looking at the doctor to patient ratio. We're looking at state budgets, in many states. And it's shocking to see how low some of these budgets are for states and how, because one thing about budgeting is the what you give priority will show in your budgeting. And that thing is that's one of the things that we've observed with our state budgets, that the priority where their attention is, or where they what they value more, is where they're pumping the money the most. You see, so in some case, for example, we saw that a single doctor serves over 20 people. Of course, the issue of jackpot has been a problem. You realize that because of the poor pay and the poor attention given to infrastructure, and also the poor budgeting given to the healthcare in Nigeria or in some states, most of these doctors, after training, they actually leave the country. And the wave of jackpot actually created a form of emptiness in our healthcare. So you're seeing where we are having a single doctor to serve 20,000 people in some states. A single doctor is serving about 14,000 people in some states. And that's actually a problem. So we make an attempt to showcase these things to government to see that, okay, these are the issue. This is the state of things in our healthcare right now. So what stood out most for us, for me, was how fragile the system has remained even since after COVID. It's not just even about the funding gap, but because of the weak coordination between even states and the federal response system. So, in many states, for example, emergency plan exists only in theory, but not in practice. That's one of the things that's actually one of the takeaways from that BADA report. Over to you, Vera.
I mean, I agree with you because I was recently in the hospital and I think I was number 202. And we had three doctors serving everyone that was there. I think they had like other people who came after me, and there was like 300. So just imagine, I basically spent the whole day in the hospital. So it's really, really an emergency. Like you said, there's a brain drain taking out our doctors from the hospitals. There's a resident strike going on. I mean, the Nigerian government needs to pay attention to health here in Nigeria. This can't keep going on, and that's why this index is really important for policymakers, the government to pay attention, and something you said about when we spoke about the Donald Trump story versus Nigeria is, that predictiveness of seeing the signs and be able to plan properly, right? Not responding as it happens, but to preempt and prepare for a response. Lastly, I want to ask, based on what this index revealed, what practical steps can state governments and the federal government prioritize now to strengthen Nigerians' preparedness and ensure that the country is better equipped to handle future health emergencies?
Yeah, so the first thing I will suggest, in fact, the index makes one thing clear when we're preparing for this report that to prepare for such kind of health emergency, it starts with people. So Nigeria, as a country, need to face security. We face what I refer to as a critical shortage of frontline health workers, just like you've mentioned. Now, the doctor to patient ratio, the first step for me is to make retention and deployment of health professionals a national priority. Or maybe through a better pay, better equipment, and also rural incentives, because some of these doctors don't want to even go to some rural communities because of how bad infrastructures are in those communities. Now, another thing I would suggest is that the state government needs to invest in data and also surveillance, because many still rely on paper-based reporting, which slows outbreak detection actually, and building a real-time disease surveillance. One of the things that I also observe is that people should be able to transfer. The medical sector needs to get to the point whereby people can easily transfer their health report from one hospital to another. So if I'm in Lagos and I'm traveling to another state and I want to change hospital, there should be a software that would make my data should be able to transfer easily for that. Now, another thing is the federal government should create, this one is very important to me, should create a dedicated health emergency fund. These funds should be accessible to states with clear accountability framework, of course. So we also need to ensure rapid response capacity when crisis occurs. So this emergency is not when COVID happens, or another COVID, or maybe a pandemic happens, that will not be thinking about emergency funds. We need to start that right now. We need to have that foresight to start actually looking at that. So lastly, I think there is the issue of coordination, as I mentioned earlier on. So preparedness isn't just about hospitals. It's also about logistics. It's about communication, and it's also about governance. Now, the federal and the state ministries of health must work hand in hand with the NCDC, of course, when there is an outbreak, to stimulate response scenarios, like so just to make sure that there's coordination among states and also the federal government. Because if this index shows anything, right, for me, it's that Nigeria isn't short of health policies. We have a lot of policies that we've created as a country. So what we are actually short of is readiness. So I will leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Victor. Definitely. I mean, I agree with you. The points you made, interoperability, the part where, hospitals are connected and data can be transferred, especially for um health patients that can be transferred from one hospital to another or one state to another. And, just the fact that we have that response system, you talked about the fund. Um, Hopefully, I mean, people read the report and, can draw lessons and the recommendations, which is most important, and to, engage with policymakers, to push out for the implementations of the recommendations. Thank you very much, Victor, for joining us on today's episode. It was such an interesting conversation.
Thank you so much for having me here.
And to all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. For deeper insights into our work, you can visit our website at sbmintel.com. You can check out the report that we discussed here as well and the index. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you all for listening and see you all next week.